The Deadly Promise. Although many ghosts eventually turn out to be harmless, that is not always the case. Some spirits return for revenge or to keep deadly promises with the living. Such was the case of a wealthy man and his nephew. The uncle had earned his fortune through a variety of illegal means, from smuggling to stealing. There was nothing he would not do to acquire money. Over the years, the man made many enemies and few friends. He had no family except for one nephew. He invited this nephew to live with him. As the man grew older, he realized that he had been wrong. He had several long discussions with his nephew about his many wrongdoings. Just before he died, the old man called his nephew to his bedside. He told his nephew that he would be sole heir to his estate. The uncle said, "Do not do anything illegal with the money. If you do, I'll come back and haunt you." Then the uncle died. For the next year or two, everything went well for the nephew. He was rich and happy and did as he pleased. But he had not learned how to save his money. Instead, he threw expensive parties and bought expensive presents for himself. Finally, his money began running out. He had many, many bills to pay. Unless he did something, he was going to lose everything. His only way out, as far as he could see, was to steal some money. When an opportunity to do so presented itself, he took it. A month or so later, the young man seemed to have solved his problems. He had not been caught, and his debts had been paid. Yet in his mind, he kept hearing his uncle's last words. That night, as he lay in bed worrying about his uncle's warning, he heard a knocking on his window. Startled, he sat up. How could anyone knock on his window when his bedroom was on the second floor of the house? He called his servants, but when they came into his room, the knocking stopped. The next night, the knocking started once more, but again, as the young man called the servants, the rapping stopped. The third night, the nephew refused to sleep in his bedroom. Instead, he slept in the study, but he could still not free himself from the knocking sound. This time, he heard it on the windows of the study doors. Terrified, the young man fled the room. He returned with his butler and his watchdog. Of course, by then the noises had stopped. Curling up by the fire with a book and his dog at his feet, the nephew waited to see what would happen next. He had already decided to leave the house in the morning. Suddenly, the dog sat up and stared toward the study doors. The man got up from the chair and looked around. Standing just inside the doors was the ghost of his uncle. The servants heard the dog give an unearthly howl. They all rushed into the study. They found the dog in front of the doors, dead. The young man had fainted. The young man's servants rushed him to the hospital. The doctors could find nothing physically wrong with the nephew, but they thought it best to admit him to the hospital. He kept babbling about the return of his uncle all day. But his stay in the hospital was short-lived. That night, the whole floor heard a blood-curdling scream from the young man's room. Several nurses rushed to his room, ready to further sedate and restrain him if necessary. Instead, they found that the window to the man's room had mysteriously been opened. The man lay dead underneath it. The Pink House. One haunted house is known as the Pink House. It was built before the turn of the century by a rich family. The owner had the mansion painted pink because he had two young daughters who loved the color pink. A number of years after the family had moved in, the family's older daughter became engaged. Just as all the plans were being made, her younger sister eloped with her fiancé. The older sister was heartbroken. She drowned herself in a large marble fountain in the backyard of the house. This made her father doubly sad. But after many years of grieving, he finally forgave his younger daughter and her husband. He welcomed them back to the Pink House to live. A year later, the couple had a daughter. The father was overjoyed to have a granddaughter. For the next 2 years, it seemed that the Pink House would be happy. As the girl became a toddler, she began to act strangely. She avoided other children and preferred to be alone. She would go outside and play in the gardens all by herself. At night, she would get up and wander aimlessly in the moonlight. One night, the little girl saw the ghost of her aunt, the older daughter who had killed herself. The ghost motioned for the little girl to follow her. They went outside and over to the marble fountain. The next morning, the little girl's body was found floating face down in the water. After that, the ghost of the restless aunt haunted everyone in the pink house. Finally, the grandfather couldn't stand it anymore. He made his daughter and her husband move out of the house. He died shortly after that, a broken and unhappy man. The remaining daughter inherited the mansion, and after some time, she and her husband returned there to live. By this time, they had another 2-year-old daughter, and they watched her night and day. On the night they moved into the mansion, the ghost came back to kill her second niece, but the girl's father was keeping watch in the little girl's room. The man lit a candle, and the ghost disappeared. After that, a light was kept burning in the girl's room to keep the ghost away. The ghost only came back one time, just for a few seconds, when the candle flickered. As the years went by, the candle was replaced by gas lamps and then electricity. If you were to walk by the pink house, you would still see a light shining in a corner room. The light still protects the niece, who has now grown to be a very old woman. The hidden fortune. One reason that ghosts may haunt a house is money. This is especially true if the ghost hid money in the house and didn't have a chance to tell anyone about it before he or she died. One such case involved a man named Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson bought a house on a small lot and planned to rent it. The people who had owned the house before had also tried to rent it, but they hadn't had much luck. They were very mysterious about why they couldn't keep tenants, but Mr. Johnson was convinced that he could do a better job. It didn't take Mr. Johnson long to find out why tenants didn't stay. They all said the house was haunted. It was too scary for them to live there. Every night, they said, an old man with a cane would thump loudly down the steps. He would walk noisily to the parlor. Then he would walk over to the paintings hanging on the walls and tap them with his cane. Then he would turn around, clump back upstairs, and disappear. The tenants said that they could see him, but that they couldn't touch him. Several had tried to stop him, but all they got when they grabbed at the old man was a fistful of air. Mr. Johnson didn't believe this was really happening, but he had already lost a number of tenants, so he hired several men to stay all night in the house and to report back to him on what was happening. The men put up a table in the parlor and began to play cards to pass the time. Shortly after midnight, they heard the old man coming down the stairs. They all watched in horror as he hobbled into the parlor, tapped the paintings, and went back upstairs. A couple of the men tried to grab hold of him, but their hands went right through the old man's image. As soon as it was over, the men locked the house and ran over to see Mr. Johnson. The group of 6 men told Mr. Johnson that they had seen the ghost. After a while, the group decided there had to be some meaning to the old man's visit. His actions never changed. Someone asked Mr. Johnson where he had bought the paintings, since they seemed to be of particular interest to the ghost. The landlord said that the paintings had come with the house. Another man in the group remembered that the man who had built the house was very rich and that he had lived there for years. The group decided that they should go and give the paintings a closer look. At dawn, they all went, Mr. Johnson included. When they got there, they discovered that behind the oil paintings, tucked into the frames and hidden under the wallpaper, were securities and bonds worth thousands of dollars. Mr. Johnson called a priest to bless the house, and the old man never returned, apparently satisfied. Hey guys, Black Sapphire here. This is my very first creepy reading, so, go easy on me a little bit. Like if you like the video, subscribe. These were just 3 stories out of a small book that I had way back when I was in middle school, and I enjoyed them as a kid, so hopefully somebody else will enjoy them or remember them too. Anyway, see you guys next time.